Thanks so much for joining us, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to the first Able Share for 2024. My name is Nairi. I'm part of the Able Plus team, and Able Plus is bringing you this webinar today. Today's topic is around positive behaviour support and restrictive practices. I know personally I'm really looking forward to getting information around both of these topics. But before we deep dive into that topic and before I introduce our very special guest presenter, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia. Today I'm on the beautiful Meanjin land, and I pay my respects to all Torres Strait Island and Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to anyone joining the webinar today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you can make sure that your laptop or your phone is on mute as we go through the presentation, that would be wonderful.
Yes, of course, I know that.
Apologies, I can hear a couple of people in the background. So if you just mute your laptop or your phone, that would be great. We encourage you to use the chat function and just introduce yourself and let us know where you're from. And also, if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, pop them in the chat box. We will endeavour to get to all of those questions at the end of the presentation. We do have a hard end time of 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Savings time. So if we haven't got to all of your questions by the end of it, we will take your questions and we will send the questions and the answers out to you after the webinar. Also, we are recording this webinar. So if you prefer not to be on the recording, I encourage you just to pop your camera off. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome from Melbourne, Rosie Valencia. Rosie is the founder and director of Insight PBS. Welcome, Rosie, and thank you so much for being with us today. I know you're a very, very busy person, so we appreciate you being with us. We appreciate greatly sharing your insight and your experience and your knowledge. So welcome and thank you, and I will hand the presentation over to you.
Hi, Neri. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Certainly I'm busy, but I will always make time for educational purposes. I love that I love the sector and I love what I do. And I think that's the reason why we're all here. So without further ado, I will start sharing my screen. And like you have done already, Neri, I will again, in the spirit of reconciliation, Inside PBS and Able Plus acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Beautiful. So, like Nari introduced, we will be talking about positive behaviour support and restrictive practices. For those ones who don't know me, my name is Rosie Valencia. I'm an advanced behaviour support practitioner. I'm the managing director at Inside PBS. Now, we will start this topic, but please, Nari, if I go too fast or too slow, please let me know. Beautiful. Our agenda for today will be what is positive behaviour support? What are behaviours of concern, dignity of risk versus duty of care, supported decision-making, which will tie quite nicely with duty of care, what are restrictive practices, the types and the obligations for registered and non-registered providers. Let's go into positive behaviour and unsafe interactions, risk of harm or behaviours of concern. Now, what is positive behaviour support? PBS is an intervention designed to improve social skills, communication, and functioning in individuals with developmental disabilities. PBS is a way of working with people with mental illness and disabilities to improve their lives with positive strategies and by addressing challenging behaviours, unsafe interactions, or risk of harm. Now, under the NDIS, PBS has two main objectives. The first objective is to improve quality of life. And quality of life is only going to improve if we manage to reduce behaviors of concern. Now, the second objective and the second goal for PBS is to reduce and eliminate restrictive practices. We will cover a little bit more about restrictive practices later on in this presentation. Now, with PBS comes from the perspective that every form of behavior is a form of communication, and we are trying to understand what the message is. Functions of behavior can be actually identified what the reason for the behavior is. And those are either access to tangible or activities, that is self-explanatory. Then we have, that's it. Could be escape, and that is to escape the stimuli that we are in, that the person is in, and that could be a feeling of pain, or escape to the stimuli that the person is under. The third one is positive social interaction. Now, commonly and wrongly, this is called attention. When people are calling for attention, we usually say it. They are craving that positive social interaction. And finally, sensory. Some people seek the sensory stimuli because we need it. We might be craving the warmth or the cold of certain surfaces. Now, some of you might be aware that the NDIS has recently released a number of resources and tools. One of those resources is the Behavior Support Report template, a new template. In that template, what it was previously called Behaviours of Concern now has been renamed to Risk of Harm. This adjustment is for the purpose of reflecting a purposeful move away from language that could imply blame on the person. It is important to clarify that any behavior listed below are those posing a risk of harm to the individual, to the people around them, or to the environment. Now, having said that, unsafe interactions is also a commonly used term to emphasize the shared responsibility in interactions and shifting away from assigning blame to the person. Now, what are these things? These things, behaviors of concern, unsafe interactions, or risk of harm, whichever you want to call them, are interactions, are behaviors that are escalated that can impact the well-being or physical safety of a participant or people around them. What do they look like? They can look like verbal aggression, people swearing at us, yelling at us. They can look like physical aggression, physical aggression, punching, spitting, pushing, kicking. They can look like property destruction, self-explanatory, destroying property, throwing things, breaking things, flipping tables, and self-harm. This links quite nicely with the explanation of duty of care and dignity of risk. What is duty of care? Now, please note here that there are a few keywords that have been highlighted for the purpose of really emphasize the meaning of duty of care. Now, duty of care is a legal obligation that we all have to take reasonable steps to not cause foreseeable harm to another person or their property. It is the obligation to ensure a person's safety and to manage any foreseeable risk and or dangers. Please note that the keywords here are reasonable steps and manage. Does not mean eliminate. Whilst caring for people with disabilities, we all have a duty of care to the people we support. In our industry, caregivers as a whole are trained to do everything in their power to keep participants they support as safe as possible at all times. But think how different your life and you would be if, for instance, every single risk would have been removed from your life. And that goes from not being let go to walk on your own when you were learning to walk, or not actually going for that walk a couple of months ago that you wanted to because you were too afraid of. To understand this, we need to understand what risk is. The word risk currently is loaded with negative connotations. That's why we as a society try to move away from risk. However, risk is a part of life. We know this by now. It is the choice we make about the foods we eat, the activities we undertake, and our basic lifestyle choices. From the breakfast that we had this morning, to do we turn right or left to go home because we can avoid traffic, or maybe we're actually going to get stuck into a traffic jam. Those are the choices that we make on an everyday basis. As a whole, it is the right to make a choice, whether that's the right one or the wrong one. Moving on. Now we need to understand what dignity of risk is. What dignity of risk is. Is the principle of allowing each person the right to control their own destiny and to fully experience life. The good, the bad, and the ugly. All of it. We have had our highs, we have had our lows, we have had the beauty of things, we have appreciated the awful of things. We could not have appreciated the beauty without the bad experiences.
I'll send that through in the email, and then I'll send Scientist's number if you are still getting stuck with getting to documents. I just recommend calling straight through to them. They can provide really tailored documents to why that might not be recognised. But yeah.
Before I continue, can I please ask everyone to make sure that their microphones are muted? Thank you. Thanks. Dignity of risk is another way of saying you have the right to live the life you choose, even if your choice involves some risk. Now, there's a big umbrella here between neglect and overprotect when we're talking about providing care for someone. We either neglect that person and let them do whatever they want, even if they want to jump off a bridge, or we overprotect and we do not let them do because we might as well be afraid that they could hurt themselves. So the tricky part is that we have as carers is to manage that balance and meet somewhere in the middle. It's not about eliminating the risk at all. It's about learning to manage it and reducing it and minimizing it in different ways. Now, there are more than 550,000 people with disability receiving NDIS supports. This is something for you to think about. How many of them do you think they can truly practice dignity of risk? How many of them do you think they can live the life that they fully want with the ability of making choices, right or wrong? Something for you to think about. So the question is, do we intervene? If so, how do we do it? When we support people with disability, we need to take into consideration their mental and physical capacities to make an informed decision as to how to support them. This means to get to know the person you're supporting. This includes using a trauma-informed approach and understand the person as a whole. What is the decision to be made and the risk around it? Do the participant have the necessary information to make an informed decision? If we're helping them to make a decision about purchasing a bike and we're putting information in front of them about a car, is it relevant? Is it going to make sense to them? No. Is the information easy to understand? If I was putting this presentation in Chinese to you, and I'm going to go with the assumption that not many people here speak Chinese, so if this was in a different language, would you be able to understand it? No, because it wouldn't be easy to understand. By making an informed decision, we're working towards minimizing the risk. And this does not mean eliminating the risk. It means eliminating. It means just minimizing the risk. A reasonable risk is any action, activity, or behavior that starts with careful consideration and results in taking chance to a positive outcome. Whilst providing services to NDIS participants, it is important to strike a balance between valuing and respecting the participants' right to exercise control while fulfilling our own responsibilities. We need to manage, not reduce it, not eliminate it, sorry. We need to manage and reduce any foreseeable risk and or dangers which may arise. On the side here, there's a few lovely pictures that will potentially help you to remember this. What is duty, risk, dignity of risk, which is understand the risk. We need to help the person to understand the risk, discuss with the person to manage the risk and reduce the risk, and then respect. Respect the choice that the person makes. Every single process, every single step of this process needs to be person-centered. Now we move to supported decision-making. And it overlaps a little bit with dignity of risk. Supported decision-making, that means supporting someone to decide, is not the same as making the decision for them. And this is a difference that I was trying to make between neglecting and overprotecting, sheltering someone. When we shelter someone, we remove the right to make the decision, remove the right to take the risk. Supported decision-making means to give someone the help they need to make more of their own decision. Another word for decision is choice. Getting help to make decisions is something that we all do. We have our best friends, our mom, our dads, whoever it is that you have in your life. When you actually talk to them, maybe to hear your own thinking process, or to actually get their input, their opinion, their advice onto what to do, what could the potential positive outcomes be, what could the potential negative outcomes be. They help you in that process of decision making. In general, there are two types of decisions that we all make. There are small decisions and there are big decisions. When we talk about small decisions, they're everyday choices we make, like what we eat for breakfast, the music we listen to, and what we choose to wear. Big decisions are the life choices, like where we live, where we work, are we getting married, are we going to go on a holiday, are we buying a house, are we buying a car? Decision-making capacity is determined by the ability to understand the information relevant to the decision and its effect. When we talk about decision-making and the capacity of someone to make a decision, a person with disability, by all means, may not have the capacity to make a big decision, but by all means, they have the capacity to make a small decision. So they should be involved in the process. They may not have the capacity, for example, to buy a $2.5 million house, but they may have the right capacity to choose what they want to wear on that day, where they want to go for lunch, if they want to see people or not. It's their life at the end of the day, so we need to involve them as much as possible. How do I support someone to make a decision? First and foremost, know that the person can, in fact, make a decision. If we come with the assumption that someone cannot make a decision and therefore we're going to make the decision for them, that's going to change the whole dynamic. So we need to come with the understanding that the person has the capacity, in fact, to make decisions. Know the person well. That is self-explanatory. And again, touching on the person-centered approach and trauma-informed approach. Help them to get the information they need to make the decision. Make sure they have information in the way they can understand it. Again, this overlaps a lot with dignity of risk. Help them to think about the options, including the positive and negative outcomes of each option. Support the person to work out what they want. Support them to make a decision based on their own will and preferences. And I repeat, their own beliefs, values, and everyday likes and dislikes. Sometimes when we care for people, what happens more often than not is that we portray our own values and our own beliefs onto those people. We need to be respectful, aware, and acknowledge that our values and our beliefs by all means might be different to those ones of the people that we support. Help the person to communicate what they want to others. And the last one was help them act on their decision. Now we move into restrictive practices, types, and obligations for providers. Okay, Section 9 of the NDIS Act 2013 defines a restrictive practice as any practice or intervention that has an effect of restricting the rights of freedom of movement of a person with disability. Under the NDIS, Restrictive Practice and Behaviour Support Rules 2018, there are 5 restrictive practices that are subject to regulation and oversight by the NDIS Commission. All right? Those ones are chemical restraint, environmental restraint, mechanical restraint, physical restraint, and seclusion. Now let's go one by one. Chemical restraint is the use of medication for the purpose of influencing a person's behavior. It's worth clarifying that this does not include the use of medication prescribed by a practitioner for the treatment or to enable treatment of a diagnosed mental disorder or physical illness or physical condition. Okay? And something also to remember here is that GP or psychiatrists are not regulated under the NDIS. Right? So sometimes this, for us as positive behavior support practitioners, this is quite conflicting because a GP or a psychiatrist, they can prescribe whatever they want, whatever they fit is suitable for the person that they are servicing. And it is for us to identify if they are or if they are not a restrictive practice. In fact, this is obviously in conversations with them, but sometimes it does not align. Let's go to environmental restraint. Environmental restraint restricts a person's free access to any part of their environment, including items or activity or community. I think that's quite self-explanatory. Mechanical restraint. Use of a device to prevent, restrict, or subdue a person's movement for the purpose of influencing their behavior. Now, this does not include the use of devices for therapeutic or non-behavioral purposes, right? So if someone has a spina bifida and they need to use a chest or waist harness or be on a wheelchair, that does not consist a mechanical restraint. I will give you some examples on the later slide, so it could be easier to understand. Physical restraint is the use of physical force to prevent, restrict, or subdue movement of a person's body or part of the body for the purpose of influencing their behavior. When we hold someone's hands because they're trying to hit us, when we pin someone down, that's a physical restraint. Now, physical restraint does not include the use of hand-on-hand techniques, for example, in a reflective way or guide or redirect a person away from potential harm. It is consistent with what could reasonably be considered the exercise of care towards the person. If we hold someone's hand to cross the road, that's not a physical restraint. If we pull and yank their hand to cross the road, that's a physical restraint. Seclusion is the sole confinement of people with disability in a room or a space at any time where voluntary exit is prevented or not facilitated. Now, there are two examples here that I can give you for seclusion. When a person has been institutionalized for so long that being in a room by themselves, locked, that's how they feel safe. And I'm giving you this specific example because this is something that we have experienced and explored with the NDIS commissioners and analyzed it very thoroughly, not because someone purposely and voluntarily locks themselves in a room means that they are doing it because of their own sanity. It's because they have been institutionalized for so long that is the only way that they feel they cannot hurt other people. Staff and other residents retreating to an office or secure room, backyard, while the person is restricted to the remainder of the house and is unable to leave or believes they are unable to leave. So that is seclusion. When staff seclude themselves in an office to protect themselves from potential harm from a participant, that is seclusion. I'm mentioning here surveillance technology. Surveillance technology used by an NDIS provider or a provider by itself in the course of delivering supports to people with disability can constitute a restrictive practice. It's not a regulated restrictive practice by the NDIS because it's more linked to enabling a restrictive practice rather than being a restrictive practice itself. The next slide will give you a better understanding and you will have stronger examples. So we have the practice on the left side of the table. We have an example of not a regulated restricted practice, and then we have example of a regulated restricted practice. Let's go with chemical restraint. Ahmed was prescribed risperidone for the treatment of his diagnosed schizophrenia. In fact, risperidone has been well proved to be a good treatment for schizophrenia. So that's not a restricted practice. Now, we have
I just have a quick question. Just going back to your thing in regards to chemical restraint, and you're going into schizophrenia right now. If a participant has a PRN as a restricted practice, however, which comes under chemical restraint, and the participant has clearly indicated that they do not wish to. They don't, they haven't wanting this particular restricted practice. What is the role of the clinician to, which is really important, what is the role of that particular clinician when it comes to duty of care? And given that possibly if the clinical team, which is the mental health clinical team, would not how do you say, is resistant to remove that particular chemical.
What is the job of the clinician? When you say clinician, do you mean the behavior support practitioner or the prescribing practitioner?
The prescribing practitioner.
Okay.
So
so if, let's say in this case, we have, what's the diagnosis?
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia.
What's what you're talking about? Yeah. So they have a PRN with,
So diagnosis is schizophrenia and they are being prescribed risperidone, correct?
No. So they have a schizophrenia, so they have the prescribed medication for their mental illness. However, they've prescribed additional medication to manage their behavior. And when the form is sent out to the prescriber, and they've written this particular medication is for behavioral management and it is not related to their mental health. Now, when so once that has been established, then the clinician would go back to the participants and discuss that, etc. But then the participant has indicated that the reason why they've agreed to it is because they have thousands of other reasons. but this is not something they're wanting. They need to facilitate other form of strategies. Now, because the prescriber is not adhere to what the recommendation from the behavioral clinician is, and so what is, I guess the question is, what is the duty of care if the medication that is prescribed as a PRN isn't as a chemical restraint is not, I guess, is not wanted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's
It's okay. I'll try to embed, I guess, all of the different parts here.
Thank you.
It's okay when a prescribing practitioner, GP, or let's say psychiatrist has a relationship with their client, and that is again the person that they are treating. And let's say, like you said, they have identified that there's a diagnosis of, in fact, schizophrenia. The duty of care of that person, of that clinician per se, is to actually prescribe the medication that is going to assist that client of theirs to treat the illness, to treat the condition.
Yeah.
Okay. If there is more medication, not necessarily risperidone, but a different medication that is for the sole purpose of behavioral, of modification of behavior, that is a restrictive practice.
That is, but if they say the clinician, because it's a mental health clinic, so they change their practitioners every 6 months because they have registers, so they don't really know the participant, and the participant has clearly articulated to the behavioral clinician that, hey, I do not want this prescribing medication. What is the duty of care of the behavioral clinician when the participant has clearly articulated that they do not want this treatment?
Look, they need
are
to
the
hear.
Decision maker.
Yeah, and they have the clinician needs to hear the client. Is the way I see it, is a clinician needs to hear their own client. It's taking your example to a different example that could be same context. If we have someone with, let's say, ADHD, and they go to see a psychiatrist for the purpose of prescribing a medication, and with some medications, it might be a trial and error, because let's say that some medications for ADHD have the side effects of actually numbing a person. You're here, you have the focus, but then you are not aware of your internal emotions. You're fairly flat. A person has the right to go to the psychiatrist and say, hey, change me the medication, because with these pills, I can do my tasks, but I feel dead inside. It is their responsibility, and you said it quite well, the duty of care of that psychiatrist to change the medication and to review alternative options.
So I guess again, so what is the duty of care of the behavioral clinician if the psychiatrist is not willing to, I guess, collaborate in that approach? So that's more around because they're an NDIS participant, they're on a restrictive practice, it's in the behavioral support plan, it's been sent to, and we needed to do what we need to do, but then what is the responsibility and the duty of the behavioral clinician, more in regards to what is our duty?
Sorry, Rosie, can I just jump in there? Can we perhaps take that offline? No, that's fine. No, Louise, I'm delighted that I'm delighted that you're asking questions, but I'm just mindful of time. So, are you comfortable, Louise, if we take that offline and we can have a one-on-one with Rosie? Yep, wonderful, terrific. Thank you.
And I love this because even in my position of managing director, I'm still regularly consulted because of these type of situations, because it's very niche, it's very person-centered. It is about the person that you're servicing and the different factors. So I hear you, would love to address your question, but yeah, we'll hear you, Neri, and we'll continue. So in terms of chemical restraint, we have that example that is not a regulated restrictive practice, and then we have an example of a restrictive practice, prescribing ketamine or risperidone for ASD or intellectual disability. As a general knowledge for PBS practitioners, there's no medication for ASD or intellectual disability. So anything that is prescribed for the purpose of those two, for example, it is automatically a restrictive practice. An example of what is not an environmental restraint is for NDIS registered provider in charge of administering medication to store the participant's medication away. That's not an environmental restraint. It is, however, preventing access to a person's possession, such as their mobile phone, iPads, or cigarette. What is not a restrictive mechanical restraint is the use of a cast to heal a broken arm or leg, a broken bone in general. In contrast, what it is a restrictive practice, it is the use of restrictive clothing, for example, to prevent a person from smearing or accessing a part of their body. A bodysuit, an overall, onesies, sometimes participants do go to toilet, touch the feces, and just to prevent them from hitting themselves. An example of what seclusion is not when it's not a restrictive practice is a person being alone in their home and choosing to lock the doors while being able to open them voluntarily when they want to leave at any time. What is a restrictive practice, a restrictive seclusion specifically? Staff and other residents retreating to an office, secure room, backyard, while the person is restricted to the remainder of the house. The reason why maybe I've put this example twice is because we have seen it more than often. Agencies do come and question, we are locking ourselves in the office, we're not doing a restrictive practice. In fact, it is a restrictive practice, even though you are the ones that are locking yourselves in a room. That is, and under the NDIS, under the NDIS restrictive practice guideline, that is a restrictive practice. An example of surveillance. A CCTV camera installed outside a person's home to enable them to identify who is approaching to the front door. That is obviously, it's not enabling a restrictive practice. However, if we have a CCTV camera in place to alert support staff so that they can prevent a person with disability from wandering or attempting to leave the house, that is facilitating an environmental restraint. Hopefully that's a bit clearer now. Now, let's move into key things to know about restrictive practices. Now, restrictive practices must be clearly identified in the behaviour support plan. They must be in place, approved according to each state or territory, depending where you are. If you are in Victoria, you have the Office of the Senior Behaviour Support Practitioner. If you are in New South Wales, you have the RPA system. If you are in South Australia, you have SACAT. If you are in Western Australia, you have the RP panel, right? It needs to go through the correct authorizing process. The restrictive practice must be a last resort and in response to the risk of harm to the person with disability or others. Must be the least restrictive response possible in the circumstances to ensure the safety of the person or others. Must reduce the risk of harm to the person with disability or others. Must be in proportion to the potential negative consequences of risk or risk of harm. Must be used for the shortest possible time to ensure the safety of the person that is subject to the restrictive practice and to others. And the behaviour support plan needs to indicate how the restrictive practice will be progressively reduced or eliminated. The whole idea of the restrictive practice is that restrictive practices sometimes are needed. Sometimes are needed. I think that's a key thing that we do need to take away and we need to understand. And they are there for the purpose of safety. They are not there for the purpose of making the support workers' life easier. They are not there to make the life of the agency providers easier. No, they are there for the purpose of safety, and they should only be used when necessary and in proportion to the behavior that is being displayed. Something that I would also like to add here is that having a behavior support practitioner providing services to a participant and the implementing provider, it does not mean or give the right to an agency to just add a restrictive practice or just change a restrictive practice. I have seen that, we have seen that happening, and it's not just enabling an agency to do and undo as they please. There is a process, and there is a process that the behavior support practitioner needs to follow to either recommend the further elimination or to maybe put another measure in place for the purpose of safety. Okay. Now, this is just a table of the state and territories of agencies that authorize restrictive practices. It's worth to note and look into it. Recently, as you know, the NDIS Commission is contacting providers for various reasons. We had not long ago an agency from New South Wales contacting us and asking us for evidence regarding the authorization process. And I gave them a call and basically said, it is your responsibility. The NDIS, for example, in New South Wales specifically, the agency, the implementing provider, has the responsibility to submit the behavior support plan to the RPA panel system. And that's where the authorization process starts. So it is basically is subject to the state where you are. So later we will share the links, but please, it's something that is worth for you to look into. Now, we'll look into obligations for providers. Now, implementing providers facilitating the development of, have the responsibility to facilitate the development of behavior support plans that include a restrictive practice. What support or services can only be delivered by a NDIS registered provider? So this is a decision tree, basically. If we go by is the support or service funded through the NDIS participant plan? Yes. Then does the NDIS participants have self-managed or plan-managed NDIS? If the answer is yes, does the support or service provider involve the use of restrictive practices? If the answer is yes, that must be delivered by an NDIS registered provider. So overall here is if you have restrictive practices involved, then services need to be delivered by NDIS registered providers. Now, registered providers with no behavior support plans need to report the use of restrictive practices through incident reporting. I can send you guys later a link of incident reporting, how to do an incident reporting. Moving forward, residential aged care providers, behavior support and restrictive practices requirements. So if we start at the top, are you using a regulated restrictive practice on an NDIS participant? Let's go with yes. Is there a current behavior support plan and authorization if required in place? Yes. Then report monthly on the use of restrictive practices to the NDIS Commission. If the answer is no, within 5 days, then it needs to take a whole step of incident reporting. So the use and having a behavior support plan in place is not only for the benefit of participants, because it keeps them safe, it actually communicates with the NDIS Commission, but it also facilitates the whole recording of the use of restrictive practices to the implementing parties. Now, options available when participants use implementing providers that are not NDIS registered and there are restrictive practices being used in relation to the participant. Now, the options are either you engage an NDIS registered provider. There is a registered as an NDIS provider to directly employ staff and or use subcontracting arrangements. The unregistered provider can apply to the NDIS Commission to become registered or use a combination of registered and unregistered NDIS provider, with only the registered provider supporting using the restrictive practices. Or, if safe to do so, the provider can cease using the restrictive practices. So even though there's 5 options here, is basically there's only 2 options pertaining restrictive practices. If there's going to be restrictive practices involved, a provider either needs to be registered or cease to use restrictive practices. Those 4 are basically the process on alternatives, but only the provider that is NDIS registered should be implementing restrictive practices. And for your information, for your awareness, when a behavior support practitioner becomes aware that a non-registered provider is using restrictive practices, we have the obligation to notify the NDIS Commission of such. And it's for them to follow up an investigation process with the provider. And I am aware of the whole non-registered, registered process and all sorts, but that's the obligation that we as behavior support practitioners have with the participant and with the commission. Lastly, resources, and I'm sure that I can put these ones on the chat and help you guys finding some information. But lastly, thank you. I don't know if we're going to open the floor, Nari, for some questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosie. Unfortunately, because of our little glitch halfway through, we've run over. But if it's okay with you, Rosie, I would love to extend to the group the opportunity for them to reach out to you with any questions, or they can certainly send them through to info@ableplus.net.au and forward any of your questions, and we'll certainly be in touch with you, Rosie. I know, Rosie, you're going to drop the links in the chat as well, and we will also send those out as a follow-up. Our apologies for the glitch halfway through the webinar, but thank you so much, Rosie, for your informative presentation. I've certainly learned a lot from today's webinar. Very grateful for you for taking time out to spend that time with us today. To everyone on the call, thank you very much for joining us. We will send the presentation, etc., out to you post the webinar. This is our first Able Share. Look forward to seeing you all again on the 27th of March, and we'll be talking all things accommodation and breaking down what that means for NDIS participants. Thank you again, Rosie. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.